and this is part of what the the New Testament tells us, which is that you never know. Sometimes the least among us are actually living the best lives as we understand them, and sometimes the people we understand to be most privileged are the living the worst lives imaginable. That there is complexity and power and tragedy in everything, and that's another thing that's people have a very hard time understanding, which is because tragic that things can happen. And again, do you I mean, my one of my worries is that, for example, novel reading is finished. I mean, as a mass behavior, as anything, or even as a bourgeois activity, it's a tiny number. So, and I guess we might get these understandings or these glimpses of human nature from something like, Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones, or some kind of long rhapsodic in which character actually is vital, and in which paradoxes and tragedy does actually happen, in which the people who should win do not win, the people who don't win are actually better off, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the loss of reading fiction is a serious problem?
It is, and I've always had in my head a kind of story of decline. That in the beginning, God spoke and we listened, and then in the next stage, we read the scriptures and we ended up writing good laws. And then we lived under good laws and we ended up writing great poetry. And then we read poetry and we ended up reading great novels. And those who grew up on novels ended up doing fantastic films. And those who grew up on the films ended up doing pretty decent television, and on and on and on, down to where we are now, where there are no resources there to be drawn from, right?
Right.
And it's time to just climb back up the chain. But
Hollywood now relies upon actual comic books for a huge amount of their output.
well, one of the good things about core curricula, I teach in the core at Columbia, and I've had film students, is that they, in order to graduate, have to go through this experience of encountering complex thinking and complex characters and complex situations. If I were to do anything in Hollywood, I would, and I'm happy for someone to set up a business for me, it would be to run seminars on novels and just raising the level of thinking, which could really lead to a flowering of creativity. But getting back to something we were saying earlier about suffering and all of that, I think one thing that has happened for me since I wrote The Stillborn God is, sorry, that I wrote The Once and Future Liberal, is that I was under the impression, and the book reflects that this is just a passing American fever. We'll get over it eventually, but it's a very bad moment. Other more sensible countries will not go through this. Oh, yes, maybe some Protestant countries will because they, tend towards moral hysteria, but certainly Catholic countries will not, and so on. Turns out not to be true. And that is that the question of identity for young people is being felt everywhere right now. I had a shocking realization when I thought about it that the most recognizable flag in the world today is the US flag. The second is the LGBT flag. That is more recognizable around the world and conjures up emotion and genuine feeling for more people than any other flag in the world.